Hey, I'm Kathleen Jasper, and today we're talking about assessments in the classroom, all the different types, how to use them. And this video is going to help you not only with your teacher certification exam, but it will help you through your teacher interview because you might be asked assessment questions. And it's going to help you in your daily practice of education and your pedagogy. So let's get started. All right, so assessments are really, really important in education. We use all different types of assessments as educators. We use formative assessments, summative assessments, norm reference. And if you're new to teaching, all of these different types of assessments can get very confusing. Also, when you're taking your teacher certification exam, especially in the teaching reading or elementary education reading portions of these exams, assessment comes up a lot because in order to help students achieve, we have to be continuously assessing what they are doing to make sure we are intervening when we need to, targeting the skills they need, scaffolding when it's needed, and all of that. So using data to make instructional decisions is something I say all the time in my videos. And the data is the assessment data you get from all these different types of assessments. Now, on the exam, you will be asked these questions. You will also be asked these questions in your teacher interview. The principal might ask, how do you use different types of assessments to make decisions? And if you're new to teaching, you may not know the answer to that question. And then, of course, how can we use assessments in our daily practice? So this video today is going to help you with all three. I'll kind of talk about them. And I'm also going to do some practice test questions at the end of this so you can kind of see them in context. So let's hop over to my presentation so I can show you a graphic that I have in many of my books to distinguish among all the different types of assessments. All right, so this is a chart that I have in almost all of my books. I have this kind of assessment chart. This is coming from our brand new 7002 book, which is part of our bigger book, the 7001. This is the new elementary education exam, but this particular chart is in my teaching reading, elementary ed, math. I mean, it's all used and across many different content areas. So getting to know this graphic is really, really important. So let's just talk a little bit about all of these different types of assessments. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see each individual one. But remember, we are using assessments to make instructional decisions. That is the only reason why we would use assessments. We don't use them just to put a grade in the grade book. We don't use them to show a student that they did well on something. We don't use them to appease parents. Assessments are data, and data is what we need to make sure we are helping students achieve. So on the exam, I want you to think about that in your mind, and in life, I want you to think about that. Assessment data is going to help me make instructional decisions. Should I slow down? Should I speed up? All of those different types of things. All right, so I'm going to zoom in just a little bit and bring us down to our diagnostic assessment here, okay? So the diagnostic assessment can be a pre-assessment, but it doesn't always have to be a pre-assessment. In fact, the questions that I'm going to share with you at the end of this video, you're going to see that it's not necessarily always done at the beginning, but diagnostic exams do help us in the beginning of instruction. So you might give a pre-assessment or a diagnostic assessment to figure out if students have any preconceptions or misconceptions about something. For example, if I'm a science teacher, and we're going to start a unit on cells, I might give students just a quick diagnostic, maybe 5 questions, 10 questions, and see if they kind of understand cell theory, see if they have any misconceptions. Sometimes students come to the learning with a bunch of misconceptions that we have to kind of debunk before we get into, the actual study. So that would help. Now, if it could be a pre-assessment, maybe it's a reading fluency read where I'm just trying to assess the student's overall fluency, kind of what level they are. All of this is a diagnostic. Now, another thing about a diagnostic, which is really, really important, is that diagnostics are used to diagnose something. So you can diagnose obviously preconceptions and misconceptions, but you might be able to drill down and diagnose an actual skill that's missing. For example, let's say that you have a bunch of students who took an assessment and it shows that they're low on comprehension. Well, comprehension is kind of an overarching skill, right? There's key idea and details in there, there's plot, there's setting, there's all kinds of things that go with comprehension. You might do a diagnostic to diagnose the actual thing that they are struggling with. So you might drill down even further and use a diagnostic assessment. So this is typically a formative assessment. This is used to monitor progress. It does fall into the formative assessment. It can be a pretest, or it can be a follow-up assessment where you're trying to dig down deeper and figure out the exact skill the student is missing. Now, formative assessments are the most common assessments teachers use every day in their classroom. These range from a bunch of different types of formal and informal assessments. Typically, though, formative goes with informal. These are checks. These are walking around the room and observing students. You might even take little anecdotal notes as you are talking to students or watching them do something. This is a really powerful way to see how students are doing and to gauge what else they need. This is you being a teacher. You might move one student out of that group that they are in because they're too advanced or they might be too low, and you put them in another group, flexible grouping. You're formatively assessing along the way. You might, after a reading in class, you might give a quick formative assessment to make sure students understood. If they did, great, you can move on. If the majority didn't, you're going to have to slow down. Formative assessments also include exit slips, 3-2-1 exit slip. You might take, and I'll just stop sharing here. You might take your sticky notes, right? And this is a really good formative assessment. I love this. I always did this, but you might have students write down 3 things they learned, 2 questions they still have, and 1 aha after a lesson. I love the 3-2-1 exit slip. It gives you a lot of really good qualitative data, formative data. And then before they leave, and that's why they call it an exit slip, before they leave, they write this down. And as they walk out of the room, they stick them to your board. And then you collect them and you look them over. Okay, you know what? 70% of my class had the same question. That tells me tomorrow I need to go over that because the class all had that same question. Or you might have 5 or 10 students with the same question. You might group them in a small group and go over that with them. It all gleans really good information that you can use in the following lessons. It helps to monitor progress. And that's what formative assessments do. So the 3-2-1 exit slip, really good way to get your students thinking about the learning and a really great way to collect qualitative, remember, because qualitative is not numerical. It's more of talking to students, observing students, collecting their writing. So it's qualitative, formative data that is very, very powerful and very, very specific. So formative data, I believe, in my own opinion, is the most powerful because it gives us that real-time data and we can then intervene, monitor progress, go in and say, you know what, you guys all had the same question. Let me pull you out. Let's talk about it. Or you might be walking around the room and you have 4 or 5 students who are struggling with the same thing. You might group them together tomorrow because you wrote it down. All right, Susie, Jane, Jose, and so all are struggling with this particular word. We need to go over the phonics of this word. I'm going to pull them out while the rest of the students have an anchor activity. All of that is a way to improve your instruction based on the data that you collect. So that's formative data. And a lot of times it is informal because you're just doing it on the fly. There's no like major state exam. The state exam is not a formative assessment. I know some districts call some of their more formal assessments formative assessments, and they are not. Formative assessments are used to drive instructional decision. It's not the end all be all. It's not the final grade in the grade book. That's a summative, and we'll go over that next. Formative is ongoing. Students should be able to retest. You should retest students to see if they got it. Formative, ongoing formative checks, typically qualitative, not all the time, qualitative data that you collect so you can intervene and make sure that you are scaffolding for the students based on what they need. All right, let's talk about summative here. Now, summative has to do with outcomes. Very important. You want to make sure that you make summative attached to outcomes. Well, what does that mean? That means you're testing at the end, summative, at the whole sum of learning, the end, the outcomes. And this helps us determine if what we did worked. So let me give you an example of how we might arrive at the summative. Let's say at the beginning of class, and I'm a reading teacher, okay? I'm a 10th grade reading teacher. So I do a quick diagnostic at the beginning of this particular unit, okay? And I might be doing a diagnostic on comprehension, and I'm trying to figure out if students have, trouble with key idea and details, main idea, theme, plot, metacognition, whatever it is, I am looking for it in my diagnostic. And let's say I find it. I have a few students who struggle with sequencing. I have a few students who struggle with predicting. I have a few students who struggle with summarizing, and I have a few students who have trouble with overall comprehension in terms of understanding the theme of the message. So I might then group the students and kind of figure out how I'm going to teach them. I might do a whole group instruction on all of those things because they're all important. It just depends. And then as I go through the unit, I'm going to formatively assess them along the way. So I'm going to walk around the room. I'm going to observe. I might do a quick check. I might give them 5 or 6 questions at the end of a reading to see if they're understanding. I might, if I have the kids in all the different groups, I might formatively assess them differently, right? I might have a formative assessment for this group versus this group versus this group. I might do 3, 2, 1 exit slips after learning one day. So I've got all this formative data, and then I'm tweaking and I'm moving and I'm scaffolding and I'm targeting and I'm helping the students along the way. And then at the end of the unit, I give them a summative after I've intervened, after I've scaffolded, after I've continuously progressed, monitored, all of that stuff. Then I bring in the summative to see if what I did worked. If it did, we can move on using that same method. If the summative shows low outcomes, well, then what I did didn't work and I need to go back to the drawing board. So the summative assessment happens at the end. Diagnostic and formative are ongoing. They can be ongoing, and they're happening during the learning. Summative is like, all right, we are done with the unit. We have intervened. We have done everything we can. Now it's the end. This could be a chapter test, a unit test, a midterm, a final. State standardized assessments are considered summative because they happen at the end of the year. Anything that's measuring outcomes, all right, that is going to be a summative. So you can see here in the example, a reading teacher gives a midterm exam. That is a summative. That's the grades in the gradebook, finals, things like that, end of learning. Now, another type of assessment, let's jump down here to criterion reference. I'm going to go to performance-based in a second, but I want to go to criterion reference since we did summative. Criterion referenced, keyword here, criterion, are standards-based assessments. The criteria is the standards. Now, criterion referenced assessments are also considered summative because they can happen at the end of learning. The criterion reference are typically the state standardized tests that students take in math, reading, civics, history, things like that. All of you are from different states if you're watching this, but your state has some sort of criterion referenced exam that the students take for the major content areas in school. And so typically, if it is measuring learning against a set of standards, that is the criteria. That is a criterion reference. State standardized tests are criterion reference. Now let's talk about norm referenced. Norm referenced is a student-to-student comparison. Sometimes after the criterion referenced exam, students will take a norm referenced exam administered by the state. And it's kind of comparing district to district, school to school, determining what percentile students are in. So if you see like, oh, you're in the 75th percentile, that means you scored at or above 75% of the students who took the exam. If you're in the 25th percentile, you only scored at or above 25% of the student who took the exams. So you can see that it's a student-to-student comparison. And the NAEPs are a national norm referenced exam. Typically also, if we're talking about a bell curve, you know, this graphic here, the bell curve where most students fall inside that bell, that is attached to norm referenced assessments because we're trying to figure out what's the norm, what's the normal bell curve here. Okay. Now, performance-based is just that. Students have to perform something. This could be writing assessments. This could be where they have to do a presentation. It could be that you give the students some sort of problem, and this could also be called problem-based assessments. It's a type of performance-based where they actually solve the problem. They are performing a task. This is not just bubbling things in on a Scantron. This is about measuring their performance. It could also be a performance-based assessment could also be a fluency read. They are performing there. Typically, though, performance-based assessments assess higher order critical thinking skills. These are the bigger types of projects students have to complete and use lots and lots of different skills. For example, a class presentation, you have to do the report, you have to design the presentation, you have to make sure you hit all the proper components. You have to make sure you're engaging. There's a lot going on in a performance-based assessment. And typically this comes later in the learning. You're not going to do a performance-based at the beginning of a unit. This is going to come at the end. And if you're using this to put like a grade in the grade book and say at the end of learning, we're going to use a performance-based assessment, that could be considered a summative. Because if it's the final, if your final is your performance-based assessment, that could be considered a summative. Now, there's all different ways to think about these things. So I want you to understand we're moving in and out of these assessments in different ways. And final, universal screening. This is used to place students. This is usually done if a student is switching schools and they're coming in and you need to figure out where to put them. Maybe the reading coach is assessing their reading. You'll use a universal screening process. All right. So these are all of the different types of assessments you will see on the exam and in life. It's good to have an understanding of all of them. And now we're going to have a look at what they might look like in context when we use them in test questions. All right, so let's have a look at this one here. So you know that I always like to look at my answer choices first to rank students after they have completed a multiple choice exam. Typically, I do not like this type of practice. We're not ranking students. Now, you might use a norm reference percentile, but that's usually done for you. You don't kind of blast that all over the classroom. Oh, Johnny, you're in the 25th percentile. Susie, you're in the 99th percentile. It just is not a good way to, think about your students. So I don't like A just because the practice sounds kind of icky and I don't like it. B, to monitor progress and guide instruction. Ooh, love it. B, monitoring progress and guiding instruction is the way to use pretty much all assessments, for sure formative, but I love that. C, to measure outcomes based on a set of standards. Okay, I like C as well. That is a summative. So B and C are good practices here. D, to grade on a curve so all students have a chance to succeed. D is not correct. A curve, a bell curve is usually used in a norm referenced. You use that to figure out the norm. You don't kind of push students along so they can all get a good grade. That's lowering the standard. I don't like D. A and D are kind of bad practices that stand out. That leaves B and C. Let's have a look at the question. Which of the following is the most effective way to use formative assessments? Well, formative assessments are ongoing. They monitor progress along the way, and you always use assessments to guide instruction, even summatives. Even though it's the end of learning and you got to move on, you can use the information in the summative to make choices for the next unit, chapter, whatever you're doing. So B has got all the good stuff and it matches to this formative assessment. All right, let's have a look at the next one. Answer choices first: to determine students' reading comprehension, to determine students' vocabulary acquisition, to determine students' phonics skill levels, and to make instructional decisions moving forward. I like D the best because the only reason why we would use assessment is to make instructional decisions. Now, there are specific reading comprehension, vocabulary, and phonics skills assessments, but all assessments are used to make instructional decisions. So I like D. Let's have a look at the question. Which of the following is the most effective way to use assessments in the reading classroom? The most effective way is to make instructional decisions. That might be about reading comprehension. That might be about vocabulary. That might be about phonics. Notice, no one of these skills is more important than the other, right? So we want to make sure that we understand that first. And second, instructional decisions, that's the most important thing. That's why we use assessments. So D is the best answer. And let's have a look at this last one. Now, this one is a very big scenario-based question that a lot of people get worried about. Let's read the answer choices first. Administer a series of diagnostic assessments focused on specific skills such as phonemic awareness, phonics, and word recognition. Okay, diagnostic assessments. I like it. And just the fact that we're using assessments, I like, right? B, provide opportunities for the students to engage in choral reading so they become comfortable with reading aloud and building fluency. All right, I like choral reading, but I like assessments better, so A is still in the running. B is okay. C, group the at-risk students together and provide them with low-level text so they can practice their reading. Okay, this is something we do. We group students based on their level temporarily. Remember, this is called homogeneous learning, and I do have a video on homogeneous grouping. It should be done temporarily. We don't keep them in their homogeneous groups. And we do provide them with lower level text, but this answer choice is giving lower the standard kind of practice to me. Even though it's something we do on the exam, we don't want to kind of lean on this. I don't like C just for that reason. You have homogeneous grouping and you have lowering the standards, which can be sort of not good. So I'm going to cross it off. D, request that a specialist come pull students out of class and work with them individually. Okay, I don't have to go on. D is out. On the exam and in life, we do not want to rely on specialists to come in and save our students. Number one, we don't have the money. A lot of you will not have the specialists you need, unfortunately. If you do have the opportunity to work with specialists like reading coaches and speech pathologists and things like that, that's fantastic. And I recommend working with those people because they are amazing. However, on the exam, this is usually the wrong answer. All right. We have to figure out a way to help students in our classroom. If we're lucky, we might have a specialist help us, but most of us are on our own, especially with the way budgets are for education these days. So I would stay away from D. So we're between A and B. Let's have a look at the question. And let's go with the question, Sam. What should Ms. Jefferson do in helping these at-risk students? I like A still better than B. Administer a series of diagnostic assessments so she can dig down and determine what's going on. Still like A, let's read the rest. After the universal screen process, okay, so this is when we talked about universal screening process where they put them in individual groups based on the screening or put them in individual classes based on the screening. And in oral reading analysis using grade level text, 3 second grade students in Ms. Jefferson's class have been identified as at risk. What should she do? Well, we can't just go straight to choral reading. We don't know if fluency is the issue because choral reading is a fluency issue. We need to figure out that, okay, they're at risk. At risk for what? We know they're below grade level, but we don't have the specifics. How can I get the specifics? By administering diagnostic assessments and figuring out and diagnosing what skills they're low in. And that's why A is the best answer. All right. So remember, when we're talking about assessments, number one, for the exam, if you are a new teacher, you want to be able to decipher among all those different assessments. Number two, we want to be able to use assessments to make instructional decisions. Remember your formative, your summative, your criterion referenced, and all of that. And that's something you want to say in your job interview as well. I use assessment data to make instructional decisions. And if you're new to teaching and you've never taught before, you can say things like, I plan to use assessment data to make instructional decisions, because hopefully you've watched enough of my videos where you are going to use data to make instructional decisions. You can't just teach to the middle. You can't just say, oh, I hope I'm going to throw this out there. And if they get it, they get it. And if they don't, they don't. That's not the way good educators or effective educators run their classrooms. We are constantly collecting data, the formative exit slips all the way to the summative, more formal bubble sheet type exams. We're using all of that data to make instructional decisions to make our students stronger with these skills and allowing them to achieve their potential. So that's really, really important. Let me show you where you can get some more resources from us that will help you with these exams and also with your teacher interview. All right, so you can go over to KathleenJasper.com here and you can see that we have a variety of resources for you. In our online courses, we have these new teacher interview courses and school leadership courses. So if you are interviewing for a teaching position or a school leadership position, these are great. You can just go in here. It can be used as a video course and there are downloads and all of that here. You can also use it as an audio course. Beyond that, we have study guides. Of course, we have the elementary education with this brand new Praxis 7001. This is the brand new elementary ed test. Not everybody has to take this one. Some people are still taking the 5001, the 7811, all of that. You can see that we have here extra practice tests, stuff like that. And then beyond that, we have online courses. So if you are taking any of these, let's just say the teaching reading, our teaching reading online course is amazing. This will help you with any reading assessment that you are taking to get certified in education, including, the science of teaching reading and other reading tests that many people in different states have to take. So this is really great. Comes with the study guide. Every online course comes with the digital study guide. So that's really, really important. You can also just get the study guide. And then we have these new audio courses that are great companions with the study guide. These audio courses are selling really well. People love them. You just put on your headphones, go for a walk, vacuum the house, and you can get a lot of the information that I talk about in those. And of course, you can see more on our website at KathleenJasper.com. And finally, our free webinars. We are constantly doing free webinars. I usually do one every single weekend on a Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern. I usually take 1 or 2 Saturdays off, depending on what time of the year it is. But you can see our upcoming webinars here. If you're watching this in the future, there will be even more webinars. So check that out there. And, we have an awesome blog and things like that you can check out. All right. I hope that helps you today. Make sure you are thinking about using assessment data in order to make instructional decisions, and also thinking about that when you are interviewing, when you are taking your exam, and when you are teaching in your classroom. It's going to make you a highly effective instructor, and that should be the goal. All right. Thank you so much. Consider subscribing to this YouTube channel and putting some comments below if you have any questions. Have a great day.